two actually. One function. First function is to tell you that after this session has concluded at 12:35, those of you who wish are invited to join us in the great room of Wise College House to continue whatever discussion is begun in the aftermath of this debate. And secondarily, my second function is to introduce Jesse Dean, who will tell you the format of the debate.
All right, thanks everyone for coming. So I want to go over some things before we get started, just to clear up exactly what we're debating here, and then to introduce these lovely folks sitting behind me. So the actual topic to the there's three parts to this. The first one is the debate itself. There are going to be 6 7-minute speeches in the debate, equal on both sides. Then we're also going to have a brief discussion afterwards that'll end at 12:35, and then again we move to Wise. So the motion for this debate are social fraternities good or bad for F&N? I want to specify some things here just to make it very clear. We're talking about social fraternities only. It's specifically to F&M, although these guys probably will bring up examples from other schools just to kind of get an idea. And then we're not talking about sororities. While they're often linked, we feel that the problems and advantages of sororities and fraternities are very separate, so we wanted to keep this discussion to frats because they're very unique. So, people behind me, we have the Gov side is debating that frats are good for the campus, and then the opposition is arguing that frats are bad, are harmful. So Tom is the first speaker. He's class of 2018. He's a really great debater. I can vouch for him. I've seen him in action. Brynne, new to our team this year, class of 2019. She's pretty good too. But we have Mericola. He's a freshman here. He's a 3-time novice finalist and the treasurer for our debate society. Indira of class of 2018. She was a finalist at Swarthmore last year. She's also chair of our social networking. Matt will be the whip for opposition, and he's a member of PSP, class of 2016. He's the #6 speaker in the country right now. And then finally we have Edwin, our president, is going to be the final speaker, class of 2017. Him and Matt collectively make up the #3 debate team on the league right now. Sides of the issue very balanced. We'll get the best representation from both sides. So I have a couple disclaimers before we get started. First off, debaters, one of the skills they have to acquire is being able to debate sides of an issue that they don't necessarily agree with. That's probably going to happen here today. So I just want to, the views expressed here do not reflect the views of the individual debaters or the debate society as a whole. Also, I'm going to trigger warn this. It should be pretty clear talking about fraternities. Some bad things are going to come up. We're going to talk about sexual assault, general violence, harms within drinking, and hazing. So if any of these are a problem for you, please feel free to leave at any point in time. We are recording this, and it will go up online for you to watch later if you want to be more comfortable watching it in the comfort of your own suite or home or whatever. One last thing. This one's a bit of fun. So within debate format, in APTA, you don't clap, you tend to pound. This is either knocking or hitting on like a desk, or if you don't have that, your seat, anything like this. This came about because in Parliament, somebody along the way was like, clapping's too disruptive, don't do that. So they, instead of that, decided, hey, let's make noise another way. So if any of these lovely debaters say something you really agree with, go ahead and feel free to pound on your seat or a notebook or whatever to like show them support. So, without further ado, I ask Tom to go the first debate.
Hi everybody, I have my phone up here just so I can time to be sure I'm not going to go over or under time. So, everyone ready? Okay, so the first point that I want to bring up is that fraternities have the potential to create structured and unstructured environments. So I'm going to tell you that college is an inherently unstructured kind of environment in the modern age. Colleges used to be very, very rigid because they were run by churches with the intent of like making monks out of everybody, but that's not how it is now. Colleges are now pretty unstructured, and so because of this lack of structure, students and people in general have a proclivity to create structure and join groups of like-minded people that they care about. This is why you have formalized clubs like Players or the Debate Society. Fraternities are more or less like this, and they serve many of the same functions. They're ways for young students, young men in particular, to gather and to be in other people's company and they essentially have a community and social group of like-minded individuals that they might not otherwise encounter or interact with in a different kind of environment. Let's say that you don't have a niche that you fit in elsewhere. Some fraternities provide a space for these people to be bros and hang out, which is a real positive for them as people because now they have like a place that they feel welcome, but it's also good for the community at large. Because now that they feel accepted into another part of the community, they don't have to be disruptive, they feel that they can contribute because they feel like their own basic community needs are being taken care of. So that's good. So I'm going to tell you structure to unstructured environment. Pretty good. This is good for a couple of reasons in particular. One, I'm going to tell you that students need structure. There are some people that can operate without any problem for anybody else. Yeah, but at the same time, most people need some form of structure in order to ensure that they are consistently productive and consistently living up to their responsibilities as students and as members of a community. It gives you some sense of normalcy during a very uncertain time. College is a time for like, when everybody more or less feels like the world doesn't make a lot of sense, even if it does seem to make sense, stuff changes from year to year. This like kind of normalcy in the structure provides a sense of normalcy so that you feel comfortable, so that you feel that you are able to be productive and live up and be the best possible version of yourself. Also, I want to talk about this in terms of social structure. So when we're going to talk about social structure, like specifically parties. Say that parties are structured and the administration deals with this in a positive way. Like when everything goes exactly as planned, you know, PSAID is able to monitor a few parties, which means that there's only a particular space for kids to have parties, rather than do it in the street, rather than do it somewhere where there's just no supervision, no kind of any contingency plan. We think that this is really, really important, especially on Franklin Marshall's campus, because like we've closed frats down for a couple of weekends before. You know what happened then? Way more people went to the hospital than we think that this is something that's really, really important, and something that you have to care about if you really are serious about student safety. But again, these statistics matter because A, you don't want people going to the hospital and getting alcohol poisoning, but B, it provides the opportunity for public safety to work really well with these student groups. It provides the opportunity for public safety to talk to these people and ensure that these kinds of dangers don't come up in the future. But we think that this is something that the side opposition is going to have to grapple with because they're going to bring up arguments about like short-term harms or whatever in the future. But we think that it's really important that they grapple with the fact that like right now on Franklin Marshall's campus, this is what happens when you don't have a structured place to have social activities. More importantly though, we want to tell you that this is structure that's created by students. Fraternities are regulated by administration, yeah, but they're largely student-run. And this means that students are self-incentivized to take on and live up to responsibilities. It teaches you community, it teaches you life skills, and it ultimately teaches you a way to function in the real world because you have to deal with communities of like-minded individuals and sometimes communities of non-like-minded individuals. We think this is really, really important. So what are the benefits and the impacts of this? Well, one, you get to, you know, function in the real world now that you've been able to do that. You know how to negotiate with people, you know how to make friends, you know how to be a positive contributor to any kind of community or society. I think this is like really, really important for people who want to go into the job market or some way contribute to society or go into government or like literally any job you could want. You need to know how to play well with others, and we think fraternities teach you how to do this. They also inspire people with terms of philanthropy, which is something I want to bring up in my second independent point, which is that of community engagement, both on FNM's campus and off FNM's campus. So one of the major pillars of fraternities is that they require philanthropy and community service. And while this isn't like atypical of a lot of organizations, it is really, really noteworthy because students join fraternities with the sense that they can affect change in Lancaster and on FNM's campus because they have this existing social structure that allows them to take advantage of things that are already in place and networks that allow them to work really, really well to deliver real positive social change. They also provide avenues for leadership in general, both personal and professional. So one of the most important aspects of fraternity membership and pledging is character. People are chosen to be in fraternities on the basis of their character, on their personality, as themselves, as people, as wholes. And while in some instances this is less than positive, like I'm not going to tell you that this like never goes wrong ever, we are going to tell you that there's a really strong incentive to select people with good character. For two main reasons. One, if you have people with bad character, it reflects poorly on your organization, which doesn't make any sense at all. And two, if you pick someone with bad character, you have to spend 4 years with this person, which also doesn't make any sense at all. So naturally you're going to want to select the best people that you can. And this character will translate into leadership because, again, you're selecting and discriminating on the basis of strong character. We think that this is not something that ought to be looked down upon. This is something that actually ought to be celebrated because it provides an avenue and a community for like the future leaders of this campus and of the world at large to participate in environments where they feel welcome and in environments that cultivate these senses of leadership and cultivate these senses of community. We think that these are really, really important. This leadership and experience can translate into making Lancaster and Franklin Marshall a better place. I also want to bring engagement around once more to the idea of structure. So when you have structure inside fraternities, it's becoming really, really clear that what's good structure facilitates strong communication, which facilitates happy populaces. I want to say that sometimes these structures in and out of FNM's fraternities themselves, sometimes are doing all that they can, and sometimes the structure that's not really working is the structure of the administration. So sometimes we need to keep that in mind. Engagement with the FNM community and open communication can lead to productive discourse and action. And this is something that I think that our campus is lacking. And we can debate what the reason is, but I think it's apparent that that's very true. So, and the third independent point that I want to talk about is the idea of brotherhood. So, support systems are good. Friendships are good. I don't think anybody's going to dispute that. Brotherhoods provide legitimate means to support one another, which is an incredible social good to people who are in this brotherhood. This provides, for one, good relationships while you're in college. Like, of course you want to have good relationships while you're in college. You're experiencing a lot during a turbulent time in your life. These people mean a lot to you if you're in a fraternity. You care, you forge social bonds, and this informs, again, your sense of obligation, your sense of responsibility to other people, because they've been there for you, and now you understand how important it is to be there for other people in the future. This creates good citizens, this creates good people. This has so many positive real-world impacts that I can't list them all right now. But brothers don't stop being brothers once college ends. These bonds are forged for life, and if you ask any brother why they're in a fraternity, one of the consistent answers that they give is that they care about brotherhood and they care about community. This is something that's really hard to quantify in a 7-minute speech, but it's really, really important. Because when you have a support system to help you through the good times and the bad, you understand and you feel empowered to do whatever it is that you can because you know that there is a support system that's going to have your back. The people inside fraternities really, really like them. And when something like this, when a social organization, when a philanthropic group makes over a quarter of Franklin Marshall's campus very, very happy and proud, it almost becomes a little bit ridiculous to oppose it on face. We are very proud to oppose this motion.
Are actually harmful to student life at Franklin and Marshall. The first main reason we have for this is that they're insular organizations without specific purposes. There is an existence of over 100 student organizations at Franklin and Marshall campus, most of which have very specific, well-defined purposes in their organization. Some of the specific examples of this are the college Republicans and Democrats with incentivized discourse on campus. There's several literary magazines like the Alumni Arts Review and the Epilogue. There's college house governments which offer genuine leadership opportunities, and there's a variety of other clubs with these well-defined purposes. However, fraternities are the glaring exception. We say that even though they offer, or that they espouse values such as leadership, philanthropy, and lifelong brotherhood, these values are only vaguely and broadly defined. And there are often poor mechanisms in place, or no mechanisms in place, to translate these vague ideals into concrete beliefs for the members. In other words, fraternities are self-perpetuating institutions that exist for the sake of existing. The biggest draw of fraternities is the promise of brotherhood. But we say that students can better form and cultivate these bonds of brotherhood and community by joining specific clubs and organizations that more accurately reflect their passions. And here, students can meet people whose passions are the same things that they are passionate about. This sense of brotherhood is going to be far more popular than that which is valued at a fraternity. The problem with fraternity culture is that it's so entrenched at F&M that it creates a widespread misconception among, especially the new male students, that Greek life is the only viable option for active social life. This in turn creates a self-perpetuating cycle of further entrenchment into this Greek fraternity cycle. Students engage in Darwinesque survival of the fittest competition to solidify their place in F&M's social hierarchy. We say engaging in such practices is harmful not only to the actual pledges, but also that it makes active interest-based clubs or organizations seem less viable as social outlets. All of the benefits which fraternities offer and which have been discussed thus far are actually not unique to fraternities as an institution. The perception of fraternity volunteer work as the majority volunteer outlet on campus is simply untrue. The school actively seeks to spread its community service opportunities. Emails, posters, even spoken promotion of service clubs and programs reach students on a daily basis. From there, we have to realize that these organizations and opportunities have a greater positive impact on the community than fraternities do. Campus volunteer programs exist with the sole focus being on the impact of the volunteer work. The desire for philanthropy that fraternity members will have still exists without the fraternity. The opposition has to show why these organizations create service where otherwise it would not have existed. For instance, if fraternity members truly care about service, then they would naturally join, say, Rotaract Club or work with the Ware Institution. Since fraternities are often in tension with the administration, they have to incentivize to work with these philanthropies to look good for the fraternities that they are representing, not necessarily just for the good of that institution. So despite the fact that clubs such as, an organization such as the Unconditional Cash transfers to developing countries and is one of the most effective forms of charity, you'll probably never see a Greek organization representing that effect because they don't have the same name recognition as the Make-A-Wish Foundation or the American Heart Association to benefit the club. The second main idea we have against fraternities
is basis the principle of exclusion. Fraternities as organizations are self-selective in nature. Fraternities spend entire weeks judging those desiring inclusion and then selecting their new members on controversial bases. Here we have such controversial bases as institutional racism. Historically, fraternities have been racist. They originated as an all-white institution, and while they have been notably progressive over time to be more inclusive, they still propagate institutional racism. As various freshmen and various fraternities are perpetuating racist incidents and narratives. Even Franklin and Marshall has faced recent complaints in regards to racism. One student article quickly spread through campus in which specific incidents were cited last spring, where a fraternity member allegedly targeted an African-American student with racial slurs, and several other incidents which they believe the Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life has failed to address. The widespread knowledge of incidents of this nature demonstrate the problems within the system. Other issues of exclusion include class exclusion. Due to wean out those incapable of spending hundreds of dollars a semester beyond the multitude of costs. The admissions and financial aid policies that have been introduced by President Porterfield have made Franklin and Marshall a leader in increasing campus diversity of the socioeconomic category. If we're going to make large portions of our campus inaccessible to increasingly large proportions of our student body, as we're trying to incorporate a greater diversity across the socioeconomic border, then we're failing to fully meet President Porterfield's promise of diversity and opportunity. The next kind of issue is gender segregation. One of the rival solutions to the gender issue of fraternities has been an increase in the number of co-ed fraternities. At Franklin and Marshall, however, all social fraternities are gender segregated. We say that not only is this antiquated in the 21st century, but it has harmful implications, such as promoting traditional gender roles as only acceptable roles. Fraternities are afforded privileges, particularly in housing, that sororities are not, which creates gender disparities, such as giving fraternities disproportionate power to control the social scene at the Franklin social environments reduce social conflict with people of other genders, which study after study has shown reduces understanding and empathy for women and gender minorities. Women deserve a place on this campus, deserve to be treated as equals, and we should not tolerate organizations that serve as markers for historical inequality that to this day has not been corrected in the name of tradition. And our last idea on the idea of exclusivity is that it entrenches and reinforces heteronormative ideals. Recognize most traditionally masculine and most traditionally feminine fraternities and sororities are the most popular. Still, only a handful of fraternities and sororities have listed an acceptance of the LGBTQA community on a national level. Transgender individuals and non-binary individuals are often alienated and excluded by fraternities. And we say that there are associated implications to this, and very existence of fraternities create certain gender expectations of its members. To address Gov for a minute, we have the potential for a structured environment. We've repeatedly shown that that is available through many other better outlets at this school. To say that yes, it will be a slight increase in parties or incidents related to alcohol, sure, but as promised, that is a short-term issue, and the long-term is so much more beneficial for student life as a whole whenever you remove fraternities from the environment. To additionally say that the community engagement will go against the strong incentive to select individuals who are good, but we have shown that the recruit process is flawed, and for all these reasons, we really believe that fraternities are bad to socialize at Franklin and Marshall.
The mic's too high now. Alright, so first I'm going to be addressing the arguments that my opponents have made in the last speech, then I'm going to move on and talk about why the arguments that we made in our first speech still flow through the round. So we get basically three main points out of the opponent's speech. Number one, they serve no purpose. Number two, they are exclusionary. And number three, it would be better if we didn't have it. So, starting with number one about them having no purpose. I find this ridiculous. We gave you three arguments in the past speech about why there are purposes to fraternities, how they promote the social good, and how they provide those purposes. Quite obviously that there are purposes to these fraternities. We can't just throw them off and say no, they have no purpose whatsoever. This just
doesn't make any sense. They also tell you that, well, there are better organizations. We tell you that, like, okay, fraternity members aren't barred from joining any other clubs. They can still be members of these organizations. Because of this, like, saying that, well, there are better institutions and better organizations doesn't really make sense. Yes, I'm sure, like, Tao probably doesn't, like, go to, like, Democratic rallies and all, the young Democrats, or the college Democrats do that, but you can be in Tao and in college Democrats. This doesn't make any sense. Alright, so, to respond to this, they give us warrants basically saying that, look, sure, they have some ideas, but they're too vague. And even if they do some, like, sort of, charity work, it doesn't, like, end up being the majority of charity work. And they give you examples of, like, look, you get an email from, like, the Ware Institute at least, like, 3 times a week, telling you, like, these are the good things that you could do on campus. We tell you that, okay, but a majority of students usually end up deleting the emails that they get from the Ware Institute. However, when you're in, like, a social fraternity, and your, like, fraternity brothers, like, tell you, like, hey, we should go do this good thing, you're more likely to actually do it, because you know you'll be in an environment in which you'll be around people with like-minded attitudes. Around your friends while you're doing work. Well, if you, like, respond to an email, you have no guarantee that that's actually going to happen. You could have a bad time, and thus a lot of people don't actually do it because of this. You get this perception that what you're doing within a fraternity is actually fighting for the greater good. And further, like, the majority of the student body hears about, like, the goods that fraternities do from their, like, people within the fraternity. They go out and they tell them, like, hey, we did this good thing. And people, like, come to think that, hey, look, students of Franklin and Marshall end up doing good things for, like, the entirety of Lancaster because, the fraternities are going out and spreading the good word about, like, all the good work that they end up doing, rather than, like, I don't know if any of us can, like, name, like, the accomplishments of the Ware Institute, though I'm sure there are many. So, moving on to their second point, this is about exclusion, and, like, how fraternities are exclusionary. They give us the fact that, historically, fraternities have been racist. Well, historically, that may be true. Historically, the United States has been incredibly racist. But we're talking about the modern day. They're going to have to explain about the modern day about why this is, like, super happening. We tell you that, look, there are rules set in place by the college that basically say fraternities cannot, like, discriminate based on race. Well, there are rules in the United States Constitution that say this. Because of this, like, fraternities can't be unconstitutional. And if they are doing that, and if they are breaking the rules, it is up to administration to actually enforce these rules. Insofar as administration is not enforcing these rules, what ends up happening is my, like, opponents get in the way and fraternities are banned. What happens? Like, other organizations probably form up to, like, take place in fraternities. Those organizations start being racially exclusionary, and the school still does nothing about it. Because of this, like, it's a never-ending cycle. You need to get administration actually on the same page with what should be happening before you can actually find real change. They give cross-examples to sororities and how sororities are put down. We tell you, like, once again, this is, like, mostly admin's fault. Admin should be giving people, like, sororities, like, houses and stuff. Like, this isn't, like, the fallacy that there's an actual, like, law against this. Like, that's straight up not true. It's just admin not doing the work that they should be doing. Finally, they talk about, like, why removing them is good. And, like, first, like, in order to, like, say that this is true, you need to show me that when you get rid of fraternities, you will also get rid of all the harms. That the organizations that prop up post the banning of fraternities would not inherently take upon all these harms. Insofar as that's not true, it is all, like, the fault of admin for not properly regulating fraternities as they should be doing. So far as that is true, like, banning fraternities just straight up doesn't solve any of these problems. They continue on, and admin keeps, like, not doing their job. Moving on to, like, why our points are still true. So we give you 3 main points. First, that fraternities basically create structure. 2, philanthropy, and 3, brotherhood. So first, we come up here and we talk about how, like, look, when you get into a fraternity, you get structure. Structure helps students achieve their goals. It helps them, like, basically be better people. This, like, still flows through the round. We don't really get much of a response to this. Look, like, there's a reason, like, people in fraternities generally have higher GPA than the average of the campus. It's because the structure helps them improve their everyday life. When they have a structure, they're more likely to do things like study. Fraternities promote things like study halls, and that they get, like, things like study halls to become better students. The ultimate purpose of a college is to actually educate people. Insofar as fraternities help achieve these goals, we should keep them on campus. Our second point is about philanthropy. I've let Nosy talk about this already, how, like, fraternities do good charity work. It's just a thing that they do. There's no, like, possible response to this other than, like, well, fraternities don't really stand for anything, or you tell you that this is just straight up untrue. Our third point is about brotherhood and how, like, look, brotherhood is just generally good. When people get this sense, they become greater members of the community. You can see this in the fact that most of the alums that come back to F&M and give large donations are previous members of fraternities. These people are the ones who, like, realize that, yes, being part of a community is a good thing. They are able to internalize the ideals of, like, being in the community is good, helping helping the people around you is good. A lot of these ideas are like basically lost upon like people who don't join organizations like this. And because of that, you tend to see that like people in fraternities are more likely than their Greek counterparts to fulfill things like daily work and interactions, to have strong social relationships, and access to resources people need. They feel more financially secure, they feel more physically healthy, and they take part in more of a true community. That's according to Business Insider. That's some evidence for y'all. Further on the evidence side, Gallup also finds that members of fraternity life foster greater entrepreneurial spirit in students. Of those studied, more Greek-affiliated graduates have started their own businesses than their non-Greek counterparts at a rate of 28% to 20%. That's a 10% increase in entrepreneurial businessship, the backbone of American society. Insofar as fraternities basically help promote this, we should continue to promote fraternities. For all these reasons, proud to propose.
Think of fraternities. We think of catastrophic crimes, like the most obvious of which is hazing. God will probably come up here and claim that hazing is illegal and disincentivize and does not happen. You all know that this is patently untrue. Hazing still happens. We know that hazing, as far as hazing still happens. A 2008 survey by Alan Madden decided that 73% of students participating in social fraternities and sororities have experienced hazing. The facts are there, we can't deny them. Secondly, why is hazing bad? We think that hazing exists to create cognitive dissonance. We think that basically people are put in bad circumstances, but they're psychologically resistant to thinking that they made a mistake. So in these circumstances, people create psychological defenses that make them justify why they're still doing something despite the fact that it is actively harming them. We think that this makes people justify why they're in fraternities beyond the actual points or reasons they have cited. We also tell you that why hazing is actually really truly harmful. We tell you that in really extreme situations, hazing can lead to mental illness and even death. We tell you that there has been at least one hazing death a year every year since 1969, and there are often many more. I know everyone's thinking that that hasn't happened here, that possibly couldn't happen at F&M in the middle of nowhere in Lancaster, but that's what everyone always thinks until it actually happens. We think as a complete and utter negation of life, this is the worst right storm in the debate and should be weighed heavily against God. The second thing I'd like to talk about is sexual assault. It happens, we all know it. So the first thing on this that I'd like to talk about is that sexist attitudes towards women are perpetuated in homosocial organizations. And the role of fraternities of hosting frequent parties in male-dominated spaces does not help this. We tell you that in a recent College Reporter article, a current fraternity member at F&M said, mixers become more like ritualistic attempts at sex rather than actual social interaction with another group of people. We will also tell you that National Journal published in 2007 that men in fraternities are 300% more likely to rape women than men not in fraternities. So why is this study more valid than any of the points that Alex brings up about why fraternity members aren't long and longer? I'll get to that later on. But this is why I think this is more important because we tell you that longitudinal studies like this, which track college men over time, found that even when controlling for all the other variables, like the act of joining and participating in fraternity, made men significantly more likely to commit sexual assault and made them less likely to consider non-sexual sex to be rape. The third thing we tell you under this is the Huffington Post cites as many as 1 in 5 college women will be sexually assaulted. Less than 1 out of 3 college men of reported campus assault cases result in expulsion from the university where the incident occurred. And underreporting rates mean that the actual incidents are dramatically higher than reported. We also tell you that, why is this bad? This is bad because survivors and victims often remain silent for long periods of time after the assault has occurred, not because they have no confidence in the college's handling of sexual assault cases. Note that FNM was recently investigated under federal law for handling sexual assault and harassment under Title IX. But we also tell you that a lot of the reason that these survivors and victims are reluctant to come out is because of the institutional power of fraternities, which often have large national chapters backing them and often discourage women to from actually filing suits. We also tell you under this, the other point, the main idea I'd like to bring about is why this administration and regulation can solve. So Alex briefly touches this. Like, there's some things that we collectively believe are unconstitutional, and fraternities we agree that shouldn't do those unconstitutional things. If they do, Alex tells you that is the administration's responsibility to solve this. Why can't the admin or regulation actually solve for this? The other side says that even if fraternities would do this kinds of terrible things in a state of nature, that when they're within the college environment, when they have oversight, this problem can simply be regulated away. But we don't think this regulation can work for a couple of reasons. Firstly, in order to take any action on any problem, the administration needs to know that it exists, right? The administration often doesn't know that it exists because fraternities form a collusive wall of silence which prevents administrative action. First of all, if a fraternity is doing something bad, all the members in the fraternity have an interest to keep it quiet because the organization is likely to be punished as a whole. They also don't want to rat on their brothers, and an insular environment changes perceptions of what is even considered to be acceptable in the first place. Secondly, we tell you that, but this doesn't just apply to members of fraternities, right? We say that sororities have a collusive interest in preserving the reputation of Greek life, with charters often stipulating a general alignment with fraternities. This places another large portion of campus, and one of which is most frequently in contact with fraternities, endangered. According to a study in the US by the US Department of Justice, members of sororities were more likely to sexual assaults on campus because of their more frequent contact with fraternity members. And thirdly, I'd like to tell you this, before I move on to the on these points, that other students who are closely associated with fraternity members, which is a lot of students, proportionally a lot of students in law school like FNM, also have an interest in picking their friends out of trouble. Let's go on to what Alex acts is. They give you a lot of points about structure, but we tell you that you can get all this structure in a lot of other ways, right? And they tell you about brothership, like brotherhood and character, right? So here's the thing. We think that join interest-based organizations that actually reflect your passions. People on the debate team are joining the debate team or are selected for the debate team because on merit because they can debate. People who write for the college reporter are selected because they can write. What if fraternities actually selected for them this vague notion of character? We think the way in which character is judged by the recruiting process is just really, really harmful and creates a need for self-validation, toxic masculinity and self-validation of that toxic masculinity. So Alex tells you that fraternities select people with good character. We tell you that, yes, they might not select people with good character, but we also tell you that these fraternities are actually very self-selective. They want people who are more like them. This creates a culture of grouping in which you're actually less likely to listen to other people who are not like you. Alex tells you that if culture is community, a sense of community, we tell you you can get it in other ways. Alex tells you fraternity members are can likely earn more in the long run. We tell you that's because fraternity members are very privileged to begin with, and they probably have a lot. For all these people, they're very privileged.
Cool, so before I begin, I'd just like to thank everybody for coming out. I think regardless of which side you actually end up supporting this afternoon or morning, I can't tell what it is, afternoon now, but I'm very glad everybody's come out to actually engage with this very important campus issue, so proud of that. And then I'd like to begin with the elaboration on what the burden for our side in this debate actually was. It was not to show that fraternities on F&M were perfect or that they were without flaw. All organizations and institutions and student groups that have ever existed on this campus have had flaws and bad apples and haven't fully lived up to F&M's ideals. But this is a condition of our society and our culture, and at some level human nature, not the shortcomings of these institutions specifically for all the reasons that we've already told you about. Our specific burden was to show that fraternities were good for F&M, even if the current incarnation of fraternities on campus has its shortcomings, as all incarnations of institutions do. We believe that it is still good, or they are still good on balance for the school, its students, and its community. With that, I'd like to begin with addressing Indira's speech. The first thing that she comes out and talks about is the severe issue of hazing. That hazing still happens on campus, and it is a serious issue. And we would agree with this. Hazing is a serious issue. But the problem is that lots of other organizations also engage in hazing. We think this is a problem with the creation of institutions in and of themselves. So unless you want to make the argument that we should ban all institutions which engage in hazing, like a lot of sports teams have historically done as well, you have to grapple with the actual issue. How do we go about preventing hazing? We think that actually fraternities, although they do have their shortcomings, can be useful to this effect because they form large groups of social people who are engaging in activities late at night, which the school can actually begin to regulate. When the school can look at fraternities and hold them responsible for things, this is clearly preferable to a world in which there are no institutions, in which nightlife is completely unregulated, and there's no culpability for groups of people who engage in specific types of things. She also brings up the issue of sexual assault. Again, a very grievous issue, and one which we would all agree is necessary to prevent. But unfortunately, I think, again, sexual assault is an unfortunate fact of gender relations in America, and would probably be worse without frats. Again, I think the key failure in side opposition's case this afternoon has been to not grapple with any of Tom's or Alex's arguments about how frats can actually be useful for regulating things on campus. There are bad people out there that engage in these specific practices, and without frats, we can't hold them responsible, because when we look at a frat, take one specific frat, maybe some bad apples, or someone who does something wrong, we can look into them and punish them. But for instance, because frats are good for F&M, in a world without frats, we would have a nightlife which is, again, completely unregulated, in which no one can be held responsible for their actions. The school, I'd also note that the school is under investigation for Title IX violations, not the frats them specifically. So I think at some level, the administration has to take responsibility for the failure to regulate the frats, not the frats themselves. Then Indira brings up the point that it's basically impossible to regulate these institutions, that there is a collusive law of silence, and that institutions over time build up power, which basically stops us from being able to actually deal with them in any sort of meaningful sense. But again, this is an argument for the school banning virtually all major institutions on campus because they all have some sort of seated power in administration or through their donations. I think that this is kind of a silly argument. In the long term, we actually have to deal with the problems that exist on our campus and within the institutions which actually exist on our campus, not simply dismissing them for being bad, because at the end of the day, all institutions have these sort of mechanisms, and we have to actually be able to grapple with them if we want to solve these problems in the long term. The last issue that Indira brings up is about fraternities and self-selection of character. That would be better off in a world in which clubs or institutions represent specific set values and not broad categories. But I think this is kind of simplistic, because Alex again says that you can be a member of a fraternity and other things too. We think there are probably gradations here. Maybe you're interested in politics, or maybe you're interested in arts, but at the end of the day, you want to come together with the people who share your largest group values, or something which is key to your ideal. I think that is valuable. Okay, cool. So now I'd like to get back to the main burden of our case. I'd like to summarize it in general. The first thing to tell you is that there is some specific value in fraternity, and not like big F, scary frats fraternity. It's the small f fraternity, the idea of brotherhood and community and these specific things. And at the end of the day, this is valuable because college is a turbulent time in people's lives. And when people are forming their identities, beginning to grapple with adulthood, it's useful to have a bunch of people that you can call friends and fall back on the other day. If you've had a bad day, you've just had something that's gone wrong with your life. Without these strong institutions and the opportunity to form bonds of friendship, people can get lost along the way to maturity, which we think actually contributes to a far more negative campus environment. We give you the specific facts about how graduation rates within frats are higher than the general population. This means that frats actually contribute to F&M students sticking through the entire ride. This means we had a more stable student body, which is more likely to survive the college experience, which is hard to do as it is. Even if you don't understand the value of brotherhood and fraternity yourself, Greek Life creates this network of families in which a great deal of F&M students find meaning and purpose in their time here, which I think deserves respect on face. And then the second thing we bring out is about the tangible benefits of academics, and these are kind of shameless arguments here, but the fact of the matter is that frats do actually contribute to the academics of the school. Frats all have GPA requirements, which incentivizes students to do well in class so that they can rush into fraternities or at least maintain their membership, which means that we get a higher GPA, which looks good for our school for reasons of donation or whatever. But frats also give out grants and money for academic aid. Now this may be a minority facet, but this actually allows students to stay in school. And then frats also attract students for F&M, which boosts our admission statistics, and also attract a broad admissions pool. and provide leadership opportunities. But I think what's a really important point here is the amount of money that alums from frats give to FNM. Now, this may just be a, who doesn't like money? Money's cool, right? Sort of argument, except for the fact that the reason why we're able to give out grants and loans to people who are underprivileged is because we have this sort of money that the alums give to us. And this way, frats actually contribute to the inclusivity of our campus, because we can afford to bring people to the school because of alum donations, which actually broadens the realm of FNM's actual, student body. It's probably a good thing overall, I would say. And then we also talk about the benefits of campus life here. This is where service projects and alumni job networks and all these specific things which actually improve our campus, and also postgraduate life for all of our students. These are also extremely important because alumni donations help keep the school funded. And then I think actually this is where we would rest the bulk of our case, the benefits of regulating social life on campus. Now, yes, frats have problems. The problem is that an unregulated social life is clearly dispreferable to a regulated social life. The problems which we face in American culture today regarding sexual assaults and racism and exclusion overall is not unique to fraternities. It is pervasive and it is everywhere. The question then is whether or not frats contribute or harm this effort to actually fix these sort of problems. I think it's very clear they do quite the opposite. Because fraternity parties are hosted in specific locations, and they are forced to actually record these parties, or at least apply to the school to make sure that they're approved and register them and make sure the administration knows that they're happening, allows a couple of important things to happen. P-Safe knows what the parties are, they can be ready to provide EMS care, you make sure that, for instance, there's currently a ban of hard liquor, which means that nobody's drinking anything too dangerous, and it basically provides for a safer and more inclusive Greek life atmosphere and parties on campus. These are really important issues which actually improve the safety and well-being of students on campus. So do fraternities have shortcomings? Sure, but this is not grounds to dismiss frats as bad for FNM. In fact, they represent the last real hope for regulating FNM's social scene, incentivizing FNM students to do well in class and engage with the Lancaster community, and possibly in the near future be the vanguard for racial and gender inclusivity. When evaluating this motion this afternoon, I hope that you all look to the future and not just the present. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for being here. I just, for context, want to say that over this last weekend when Edwin and I were in semifinals at American University, we had a crowd cheering for us of 2. This is absolutely phenomenal. Ultimately, they're right in this round about the general structure. This isn't a debate about whether you believe fraternities are composed of good people, bad people, somewhere in the middle. The fact is that all organizations are composed of different kinds of individuals. The question is not about the individuals in those organizations. The question is about whether the structure and hierarchy of that organization leads individuals to become better or worse contributors to our community. So I want to start with the absolute best world. This is the world where you do not believe the Department of Justice about sexual assault, where you do not believe most studies that have been conducted about hazing, and you believe that these events either will never occur or that the administration are literally a mission angel sent from God who can stop literally all of these events before they happen. In that world, why it is true that fraternities are still detracted from our student life. What they say is like, well, you have to have this structure. Individuals need people that they can identify with, people they can consider their brothers, people they can be close with, and incentivize them to keep being good members of the community. Of course that's true. What they had to show was why that's distinct for fraternities specifically. For instance, there are lots of individuals, I think I'll probably a lot of people in this audience, who probably have friends, probably have support networks, and are members of lots of other groups on campus, which means that in the absence of fraternities, all the benefits would actually still occur. I want to just give you what actually is, it may sound a little absurd at first, but with the argument that Indira gave you about, and Brynne gave you too, about a specific purpose. For instance, in debate, people are selected and come together about their interest in debating. And the college Republicans, the political ideology, the college reporter, it's their interest in bringing forward issues of the news and discussing those things. What was the actual purpose, general purpose of fraternities specifically? And we got a lot of things about brotherhood, about serving the community, about generally being good. I want to ask you if you would think it was reasonable if we just had one big organization called Student Club. It's not more reasonable just because you broke into 7 different pieces and gave them Greek letters. The fact that you need organizations still exist primarily for the purpose of perpetuating themselves rather than specific goals means that people joining those kinds of organizations inherently trades off with other organizations. Everyone here knows the amount of work that students at FNM have. It is not the case that people have an infinite amount of time in the day to join as many organizations as they like, and joining in fraternities and going to trade off with those other organizations. That means that you not only judge fraternities on their own merits, but have to judge them comparatively against the drain they force students to make choosing fraternities against other of the 150 organizations that we have on this campus. The other thing that we want to tell you on this was about exclusivity specifically. Because we told you about why with all these other organizations, there's a specific kind of activity that those individuals are selected for based on the group purpose of the organization. From acapella groups, whether you can sing in debates, whether you can debate. For like art organizations, whether you can or have an interest in doing that kind of art. You're a service organization, like they keep saying is so important. We have multiple service organizations on this campus whose purpose is for the long term, specifically to create the most good possible, and don't have countervailing incentives to just get good PR with charities that can possibly less than optimal good administrators so that they can keep throwing parties, keep serving alcohol to underage students as a critical part of their business model. The other thing I would say is that in the absence of those actual criteria that people have, that is where those other things like racism, like classism, like homophobia are more likely to sneak in. Now obviously lots of people are good people and don't want these things to come forward, and obviously these things were worse in the past and are better now. But the fact is, every single year, or basically every single month, stories come out on the news about fraternities all across this country with these kinds of incidents, and as they ignore saying, well, these are other places. Indira cites an article from the College Reporter written by an ex-fraternity member at FNM. We have to get over this mentality that these things can't happen here, that we're too special, and that these things in every other school, everyone has always said, no, that couldn't happen here, we're too good for this, is not true. Everyone says that until it does happen here, often until well after. The other thing I want to tell you is the general benefits that they talk about in terms of donations, in terms of GPA, in terms of how like the Business Insider says you're likely to start your own organization, weren't actually linked to being causal of joining fraternities specifically. What we explained is that having dues, having to pay several $100s every single semester, in addition to tens of thousands of dollars of tuition, several $1,000s for housing, several $1,000s for food, is probably going to screen out a significant portion of FNM's community. This means that the people you're already talking about are a sample which are already predisposed to do predominantly well within the American economic system, meaning that those things are actually true. But also just the fact that fraternities tend to have higher GPAs by like a 0.12 or 0.15 than typical people at FNM does not mean they cause that. For instance, I would bet that the debate team has a higher average GPA than the average student on campus. But I will promise you that being a member of the debate has actively harmed my GPA, spending 60 hours a week doing practices, grading cases, going to tournaments. The fact that there's a correlation with what that GPA is not a fact of what actually caused that in the first place. So the only other thing they had there was about donations specifically. What we told you is that, well, lots of people may have affinities for the fraternities. At colleges which have gotten rid of fraternities, the argument simply happened in at Colby, at Bowdoin, at Amherst, at dozens of colleges throughout the country that are comparable to FNM. When those organizations, when those schools got rid of fraternities, what they saw was a temporary dip, usually 2, 3, sometimes 4 years, where people tried to use their political power to get the fraternities back, but eventually the administration didn't move. Then donations went back to their historic levels, it leveled off, and there was no long-term harm. Now I want to talk about the actual major harms, which if any of them are remotely true, should be absolutely damning in this. But they have a broad response to things like hazing, sexual assault, about the ability of the administration to regulate fraternities, makes them better organizations, even if these harms sometimes happen. They say the ability of the administration to uniquely interface with them and regulate them makes them better than these from happening elsewhere. I don't know about the absurd, world that Alex thinks is going to happen when you wouldn't have fraternities. He says, well, if when you go have fraternities, at least like stops people from drinking in the streets. Like if fraternities didn't exist at FNM, I'm pretty sure that President Porterfield and Dean Hazlett wouldn't be happy to sit by as our school descended into anarchy and students were like drinking handles in the streets and throwing bricks at each other. What they do is what lots of other liberal arts colleges in FNM have done, like Swarthmore's done, like Vassar's done, and set up other regulated spaces for drinking that are run by the administration rather than a series of college men who would admit people into parties, often on the basis of whether, as their own members of the college reporters, their attempts at creepy and ritualistic attempts at sex, rather than the administration's goal to actually have a good program that actually exists there. And also the arguments in here about the conclusive wall of silence, about these organizations have millions and millions of dollars to hire attorneys to blow these issues up, which means the school also wouldn't want these things to come forward because they don't want the first thing to come up when you Google FNM to be FNM hazing incidents. It means that they also have an interest to fail in regulating these organizations themselves. Let's talk about the catastrophe. First, hazing. Indira tells you, according to most studies, that 3/4 of people in fraternities across the country have been hazed at some point. If you believe this has never actually happened, why do you believe the administration spends hours hosting events that fraternities have to go to every single semester in order to teach them not to haze? It is because these events often do happen and they are unregulable. Lastly, sexual assault. I just want to frame this very clearly. I wanted to remind everyone about last semester when one student outside of Hackman was dropped for an astronomy textbook, and everyone lost their minds. Parents were calling PSA percent extra lights everywhere. When you have organizations on campus, the Department of Justice and study after study has shown joining makes men significantly more likely to commit sexual assault. Nothing is done. We have a wall of silence about that, and the administration is unwilling to take action against that. The massive disparity between the worst harms that are committed and the dearth of actual response to it is absolutely unacceptable. We're so proud to oppose.